first. But you were good. Okay, I'll go
What
first.
was I-
Okay.
what was I gonna say?
I'll do a little.
I came to do the book, but I'll do
Oh, no, I'll do that. Okay.
I've got a little.
You're gonna do an intro.
Excellent. All right. Oh, there we go. There's that. All right, Callie already very graciously got the sound for us. Hello, folks, and welcome. This is Left Bank Books and the Left Bank Books Foundation presenting some very good returning friends of ours, beloved authors and former bookstore owners, Vicki Berger Erwin and Jim Erwin. Berger, right? Okay, all right. We are here, all, as you must know, to celebrate the release of Ulysses and Julia Grant's Missouri love story. First, a little spiel I like to do. Tonight's event is possible because of your support, which we thank you for. When you support Left Bank Books by shopping with us or donating to our foundation, your money goes directly into the local economy. It helps to keep our bookstore open, keeps your streets paved, your libraries funded, your parks free, and booksellers fed. So again, we thank you. It also helps writers get the support that they deserve. So when you buy a book at the front desk tonight or at any time, we invite you to feel free to make a donation to the Left Bank Books Foundation so that we can continue to produce vital literary events for our community, which includes you. Again, thank you all for shopping local, supporting this event and your wonderful friends here, and supporting Left Bank Books and the Left Bank Books Foundation. My name is Danielle King. I keep rewriting this in these intros, General Manager et al. That feels correct. At this point, I get to help our fantastic events coordinator, Shane Mullen, as well as our remarkable team of incredible booksellers to produce hundreds of author events just like this one every year here in St. Louis. For our friends who are online, which we thank you for joining us as well, be sure to check out our event calendar on our website, left-bank.com, for a full list of all of our programming for readers of all ages. One more time, thank you so much for being here. All right, a little bit about our authors this evening. Vicki Berger Erwin has been in the publishing industry for more than 30 years in various capacities, which does sound a little like mafioso mysterious, including sales and book distribution, and as the owner of a bookstore in St. Charles, Missouri. She is the author of more than 30 books in varied genres, picture books, middle grade mysteries and novels, local histories, and true crime. I imagine some overlap there. James W. Erwin practiced law in St. Louis for 37 years. He is the author of 7 books on local history. This is their 4th book together, which is maybe the most romantic thing I've ever heard. They live in Crestwood, Missouri, not terribly far from the Ulysses S. Grant National Historic Site. Now about the book. Ulysses and Julia Grant's Missouri love story is a presidential love story that relates the Grants' early life, their courtship, their life in Missouri, and how that life shaped their futures, thus countering anti-Black violence. Nope, that was from another one. That's probably not what this is about. Left a little line in there, sorry about that. Either way, on behalf of Left Bank Books and our good friends, please help me offer a warm welcome to the Erwins.
Thank you, Danielle.
Oh, it's my
That's really
pleasure.
nice. I don't know if this is up.
I will help you, and it is not. You just have a lovely carrying glass. Thank you so much.
All right. The first thing we want to talk about is how we came to write this book. It first came to our attention, of course, when we downsized from our house at Kirkwood and moved to Crestwood, and we live in the backyard of Whitehaven, which was the Grant residence for a few years, and Julia grew up there. But we still weren't really thinking about writing a book until Mike Stanley, who is sitting here, and his lovely wife Kathy, invited us on a tour of Grant's farm, where we were allowed to go inside hardscrabble, which was much different than we expected, and it was really nice. The whole tour, that wasn't the only thing we got to see. It was a great tour. But when we got home, I just kept thinking about it and thinking about it, thinking about it. And finally I said to Jim, I think we need to write a book about Julia and Ulysses. It's just too close to home and something that we would really appreciate later after we got finished with it. And we have. And so let us tell you just a little bit of their years in Missouri. In the book, we also cover other things, but it's always in relation to what they learned and how they lived in Missouri that we try to relate.
Yeah, Most of us know Ulysses Grant from history as kind of this imperturbable general who would send thousands of men out to die or get maimed and kind of just sit back puffing a cigar and waiting to send more of them out the next day. But as you heard from a brief description of the book, that's not what you were wanted to write about. We're talking about another side of the man and his wife in a place that where they met, in a place that was very special to them. But Ulysses Grant, as a young man, was a very flashy horseman, and Julia Grant was a fun-loving teenager. They met at Whitehaven, and their relationship flowered there. All but one of their children were born there, and it became a very special place for them. But first, a little bit of a background on the two of them. Ulysses' father was Jesse Root Grant. He was a very successful tanner. He owned multiple stores in Ohio and Illinois. His mother, Hannah Simpson Grant, was a very quiet, religious woman. And as mothers often do, when he was in the Army as an adult, she worried about what was going to happen to him. Ulysses himself was a very fearless little boy he became quite a horseman. He started at an early age. When he was 3 years old, he was allowed to be in the stable, and he would crawl around with the horses all around him, and they didn't get stomped on by their hooves or anything. And he was riding the horses at a very early age and continued to do so and loved horses for the rest of his life. Just a little interesting sidelight on Ulysses. He probably suffered from a neurological condition called amusia, which, as I understand it, is the inability to distinguish between musical notes, which one writer has compared to the inability to determine the difference between Beethoven's Fifth Symphony and yakety sax. And he hated military music. And when he was asked about what he liked, about the songs he liked, he said, well, I only know 2 songs. One of them is Yankee Doodle, and the other one is... Well, when he was 17, his father surprised him by letting him know that he had arranged his appointment to West Point. Ulysses made it clear he didn't want to be a tanner. He wasn't sure what he wanted to do, so his father kind of took the reins in his own hand and said, okay, I'm going to send you to West Point, which was a place where you could get a really good education in those days. And one of the few places you could get one for free. But before he went, he had to make a few preparations. He was born Ulysses Grant, and he had this new trunk he was going to take, and he was going to put his initials on it. But he thought, oh, if I put those on there, it'll be H-U-G. And when I get to West Point, all the cadets are going to be making fun of me. So I'm going to change it around. I'm going to go as Ulysses Hiram Grant. Well, he got there to West Point, 1839. He was 17 years old, about 5'1", 117 pounds. He was kind of a scrawny little guy. He reported in to the adjutant, Ulysses H. Grant, reporting for duty from Ohio. The adjutant looked at his papers and said, we don't have a Ulysses H. Grant down here. There's a Ulysses S. Grant from Ohio. Is that you? Well, I'm Ulysses H. Grant. Apparently, the congressman who appointed him thought his middle name was Simpson, after his mother's maiden name, and got it wrong. And they said, well, no, I'm Ulysses H. Grant. He said, well, if you want to be appointed as Ulysses H. Grant, this shows you how stiff the bureaucracy was in the Army in the 19th century, then you'll have to go through the whole appointment process again. And so he said, okay, I'll go as Ulysses S. Grant. He said, an initial more or less doesn't really matter. But if he thought he was gotten away from being made fun of by the cadets, no, he wasn't. When the list came out of the new cadets joining the West Point in 1839, there he was, U.S. Grant. And the cadets said, oh, United States Grant, Uncle Sam Grant. And they were pretty amused by the whole thing. Actually, he became known as Sam Grant, and that's how he was known in the Army before the Civil War, as Sam Grant. And one of the people who probably saw the list and laughed about it was another cadet from Ohio, a senior, a fourth-year guy, a guy named William T. Sherman. And little did he know, or did the others know, that 20-some years later, U.S. Grant would become Unconditional Surrender Grant. Well, he graduated in 1843. During his time at West Point, he got to know many of the men that he would serve with in the Union Army or against. Those who were in the Confederate Army were also had been at West Point during that time. But probably the most important person that he met while he was in West Point was his roommate in his last year, and that was Frederick Dent Jr. And when Frederick Dent Jr. found out that Grant's first appointment, his first duty station was Jefferson Barracks near St. Louis, he said, "Hey, my folks live right near there in a place called Whitehaven. You ought to go over and visit them. They'd be glad to see you." So, we know, go over to Vicki.
And Julia's parents were Frederick Dent and Ellen Warshaw. And Frederick Dent was known as Colonel Dent. However, that was an honorary title. He had served in the War of 1812, but he never made it as far as colonel. But lots of men were called Colonel so-and-so in those days. Frederick grew up in Maryland, and Ellen grew up, she was born in England. They moved to Pennsylvania to escape religious persecution. Her father and grandfather were Methodist ministers, but they were a wildly different sect of Methodism. But he did help start the Methodist religion in Pennsylvania. Frederick met her in Pennsylvania, and he was a very successful trader. And they came to St. Louis on a log raft. At that time, they had one son. They lived in St. Louis for the first years that they were in the state. And then Colonel Dent kind of liked land and buying land and speculating in land. And he was not all that successful always, but that's what he liked to do. And once he bought this farm that he named Whitehaven, he decided that he was now a gentleman farmer. And so he would sit on his front porch and read the newspaper and expound on various topics. And Ellen took care of the house. They had 4 boys. And so when their 5th child was born, and it was a girl, they were very, very happy. They named her Julia, and she soon became a favorite of both her brothers and her father. And she also became just a little bit spoiled. One of her earliest memories is being swung in the air by her father on their, quote, piazza. If you've been to Whitehaven, I'm not quite sure I would call it a piazza. I would call it front porch, but that's what she called it throughout her whole entire life. Julia went to the Gravois School. We haven't been quite able to determine exactly where the Gravois School is, but it's somewhere in Hampton on Gravois. And that's what we know. It's about a mile from Whitehaven, and so we think we kind of have an idea. And this won't make a bit of sense to you, but it's where the total access emergency care is.
Gravois and McKenzie, basically, is what
Yeah.
we think.
Oh, yeah.
So.
For those who know the geography of that area.
Yeah. So that's where we kind of thought it was. I mean, nobody's been able to give us a better explanation of it. And when she went to school, she kind of learned what she wanted to learn. And if she didn't want to learn it, she didn't learn it. So she had this way about her that even her teachers wouldn't do anything to her. I mean, there's a story that one of her teachers recounted after, many years later, that they were supposed to learn the Roman numerals over again. And he said, if you do not learn the Roman numerals, you will be punished. So the first person he called on was his little sister. And this was Mr. Long, who Longs and Sappingtons are very prevalent in that area, in what is now the Crestwood Afton and Sappington area. And Mr. Long said, she got up there and she didn't know her Roman numerals. His little sister did not. And so he punished her. Julia got up there and didn't know her Roman numerals. And she said, well, I thought I knew them, but I don't. I can't remember. And he said, okay, well, go work on it. She never learned the Roman numerals. So that was her take on it, was that she never learned the Roman numerals. She had a really happy childhood. one of the things about Julia is that there's not a lot known about her except what she wrote about herself and what her family wrote about her. So, you know, everything I kind of was not absolutely sure that everything that she wrote in that book was true, but she has a memoir, and that's where a lot of the information comes from. And, you know, there's also a lot of just pulling from that, you know, making so she always had somebody to play with. She had her 4 brothers who were very nice about taking her riding. She loved horses just like Ulysses did. She had sisters that were younger than her that she would play with. And she had
only had 4 kids.
no, they had 8 kids. One of them did not survive childhood. So she had 2 more sisters. She had that Nell and Emma, and Mary died early on. Yeah. So she also had the enslaved children from their family farm. One of the things that I found horrifying and interesting, a lot of things about the slavery part of Julia's story are kind of horrifying to the industry, was that they were encouraged to play together so that she could practice being a mistress of the plantation. So that's, you know, she just had somebody around. When she was 11 years old, they sent her away to boarding school here in St. Louis. And she would come home every other weekend, but still, she was 11 years old and she was away at boarding school. Her studies and her interest in her studies there were quite similar to the way they were at Gravois. And so she liked literature, she liked mythology, she liked things like that. Anything to do with numbers, anything like that, forget it. And she did. She just didn't care. So the summer after she graduated from school, which was the same year that Ulysses graduated from West Point, she stayed in the city all that summer. So she didn't meet Ulysses. Under the sponsorship of Mrs. John O'Fallon, who was a relation of her father and who was also a social leader in the community. Julia went to debutante balls, and she went to weddings, and she went to all kinds of parties. And she met many, many young men, and some of them were interested in her. And many, many officers from Jefferson Barracks, because they would invite all the soldiers as well. Now, Julia wasn't a beautiful woman. She had lovely thick brown hair that was curly. She had a very good figure. And one thing that they always mention when they're describing her is that she had small and lovely hands. That I guess that's the only thing you really saw on a woman at that point. And one of the things she had an eye problem. She had strabismus, she had a crossed eye, and she wouldn't do anything about that. And she never mentioned in her memoir anyone in her childhood ever said, I mean, we've all grown up and gone to school, gone to elementary school, and particularly middle school, and we know how cruel other children could be if you're a little bit different. So either those were super nice kids that she went to school with, or she just ignored the bad things, because that was one of the things that people really liked about her, was that she had a very sunny personality and she always tried to look on the bright side of everything. And she was very popular with her peers as a result of that. Now, one of the things that comes up sometimes is here she was going to all these parties with all these young Army officers, and did she ever encounter Ulysses during one of those parties? Well, as Jim said, he had this condition where he didn't really like music and he really did not like to dance. And so chances are he went to as few of those things as he had to. And neither she nor Ulysses ever, which she did not call him that, and that might be why she just called him Ulysses.
Her duty.
Our duty, yeah, duty. She called him duty. They probably didn't meet because neither one of them ever mentioned it. Now, as Jim mentioned, Ulysses had visited Whitehaven all year long, and her younger sister Nellie had been the very first one to, or was it Emma?
Emma.
It was Emma, yeah. His younger sister Emma had been the first one to encounter him, and she was already smitten of him, and she called him as pretty as a doll. And Julia's mother really was very fond of him and continued to be very fond of him and was sure he was going to be a very successful and impressive man, you know, as he grew into it. But her father didn't have much of an opinion. I mean, he did not care for him all that much. Now, when they finally did meet, they found that they had a lot in common. The horses. They loved to ride together. They both loved nature. They both loved digging around in the dirt. He was kind of interested in farming, and she loved her flowers and all of that about her garden. You probably remember this from reading the book that we read. You know, the Julia and Jules.
Jules.
Yeah, Julia and Jules. Oh, did you read it?
Mhm.
Oh, I didn't. I thought Kathy read it.
I did.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know if you read it or not. I did.
And as Ulysses said in his memoir, after Julia came home, he said, my visits became more frequent. They certainly became more enjoyable. They explored field and stream, and they just talked. And sometimes he read to her because she had trouble reading because of her eye. And then Ulysses received a leave so that he could go home and visit his family before he was going to be sent to Louisiana. And he had a question for Julia before he left. No, you're going to tell him. Okay, I'm going to talk about it. Sorry. So when he told Julia he was going to leave, he asked her, would she please accept his West Point ring, which was an understanding that if she did, she would be engaged. And she said there was no way she could do that. Her father would not approve, her mother would not approve, and she was much too young to be engaged. And she thought they were just friends. She really liked him a lot, but she thought they were just friends. And he left, and she realized what a hole there was left in her life. And she missed him very, very much, more than she had ever expected that she would. One of the acquaintances from Jefferson Barracks told her that if he did not return by a certain Saturday, that meant that he was skipping, coming back to JB, and he had gone on to Louisiana. Well, she was so concerned about that that she rode to Jefferson Barracks to check to see if he had returned, and he hadn't. During this time, Julia had received a new bed. And the custom at the time was for young women, when they got a new bed, to name every one of the pieces in the bed, you know, the bedpost, after a young man. And then if you dreamed about that young man during the night, you would marry him. Okay, so Julia had a dream that night. She dreamed that Ulysses rode up to Whitehaven. He was wearing civilian clothes, and she said, oh, I'm so glad to see you. How long are you going to stay? And he said, about a week. Well, the next morning she went down and told all of her family, and life went on, and it wasn't much longer, but Ulysses returned to Jefferson Barracks, and his regiment had already left for Louisiana, but he said, can't I please have just a few more days leave because I have a really pressing matter to take care of. That spring, there had been a lot of rain, and so the rivers were swollen and the streams were swollen, and yet he knew there were a couple he had to cross before he got to Whitehaven. He started off on his horse, and when he got to Gravelway Creek, he plunged in with he and the horse, and they both almost drowned. And so he was completely soaking wet. Well, he didn't want to come and see Julia when he looked like that. So he stopped at her brother John's house and asked, could he please borrow some dry clothes? And so John was smaller and heavier than Ulysses. So he borrowed the clothes, but they were kind of flappy, but they were dry. They were dry. And so he comes in, and one of the servants comes running in and says, Miss Julia, you have a caller. And so she makes herself presentable, and she comes downstairs and she says, "Oh, Ulysses, I didn't expect you." And she goes, "How long are you going to stay?" And he says, "About a week." And her sister at that point goes, "That was just like your dream." And Ulysses, of course, was very happy that she had been dreaming about it. So he did have an important question for her.
Is it my turn now?
It is your turn.
Okay. You can probably guess what the important question was. And before he left, he did ask her to marry her, and she did agree, but they had to keep it a secret. Because didn't want the parents to find out. They were afraid the colonel would disapprove. And, you know, his prospects were a little uncertain. He was only 22 years old and just starting out in the army. He said, "Okay, we'll agree to keep it a secret." And so he went off to Louisiana. Took the steamboat down to New Orleans, took another steamboat up the Red River to the camp where this regiment was at. He wrote a letter back to a friend of his back in Ohio. He said, basically what he said was, I'm going to paraphrase this, my trip was kind of boring, really nothing much happened. Well, there was one thing that happened, and it was really cool. I mean, it was, what he said, laughable. It was curious. It was important. It was surprising. But you never guess what it was. You never guess what it was. In fact, they probably didn't guess what it was. Well, of course, the engagement was supposed to be a secret, but Julia really couldn't keep a secret from her mother. And Julia really couldn't keep a secret from her sisters. And her brother found out. Her brother was, he was in the army too, obviously. And he started calling Ulysses his brevet brother. Brevet was an honorary rank in the army, so his brevet brother. Apparently, the only person who the secret was kept from and who didn't know about the engagement was the colonel. And so Ulysses started writing letters. He wrote a number of letters to Julia, begging her to respond. And she did every 6 months or so, but he would write every 2 or 3 weeks. And he would kind of go into despair. When are we going to do it? After about a year or so, he wrote her a letter and said, "By golly, next time I come to St. Louis, I'm going to meet with the colonel. We're going to get this thing set one way or the other." And sure enough, in the spring or so of 1845, I guess it was around there, he did come back to St. Louis on leave. And he met with the colonel. And the story that her sister Emmy tells, she said she was outside on the piazza, listening through the window as they were meeting in the parlor. This is the way she said it went. Ulysses said, "Mr. Dent, I want to marry your daughter, Miss Julia." Dent looked at him and, "Well, Mr. Grant, if it were my daughter Nellie you wanted to marry, I'd say yes. But I don't want Nellie. I want Julia." "Oh, you do you?" "Well, I suppose it'll have to be Julia. And I'll write you a letter and I'll, be more formal about it and, let you know, give you my permission." And at that point, he went off to his regiment in Louisiana, which then went down to Texas, and then ensued the war with Mexico. They did not see each other again for 3 years.
Oh, my.
Letters went back and forth, mostly from him, a few from her. Hers were never saved. They weren't saved, and maybe he lost them. He was in the campaign and everything. She saved all of his. His were saved, and that's how we know, basically what he was thinking, and how often he received one from her. Because then, when he received one from her, he would respond immediately. She didn't always do that. He would say, "Well, I'll write you one every 2 or 3 weeks, and then you can respond to me." And then, when you get around to it. So he would write one every 2 or 3 weeks, and when she got around to it, she would do it. Well, what was she doing while he was down there in these camps? He was, in Louisiana fighting the mosquitoes, down in Texas and whatever. What was she doing? Well, Julia was having fun.
She and her sister were living in Sular at the time. They had convinced their father that, it would be a good thing for them to do. She was going to the theater, she was going to dances, and they had young men serenading them at midnight every single night. So often and so loudly that the neighbors complained and said, "If you can't stop this, we're going to go tell the colonel what's going on." And that course, would mean that they would have to go back home. But Julia convinced them that doing anything to stop the serenaders was not going to happen because Nell had so many admirers. She was engaged. So she was also preparing for her marriage. Not very hard, again. She didn't know how to cook. She didn't know how to run a household. But, you know, she didn't really worry about that because she always had somebody to do it for her. And she, you know, she did start a quilt at the time for her boat chest. But she didn't finish it. And it became one of those things that she carried with her every time she moved someplace. And it became a joke among the family as the prime example of why Julia was such a procrastinator. So she just went on and on. And one of the reasons she didn't write to Ulysses could very well be because she had so much trouble writing. And
didn't pay attention at school.
yeah, well, it's not that, it was her eyes. It was hard for her to go, it was hard for her to write, it was hard for her to read. She loved to be read too,
Yeah.
but it was very hard for her to actually read books. So after all of these years, Ulysses returned finally. And at that point, there was no reason to put off the wedding. You know, they'd been engaged all this time. And they married in August on a very humid night at the Dents home in St. Louis. Now, we've discussed, well, she loved Whitehaven. Why didn't they get married at Whitehaven on their piazza? They didn't even. But it was probably one of the times when Mr. Dent had to rent out the farm because he was having a financial crisis.
Yeah.
So they got married in the home in St. Louis. Julia intended to wear just a really simple kind of muslin dress, but Mrs. O'Fallon, who had been her sponsor all those years, sent her a beautiful watered silk dress. In fact, she said it was so beautiful, she never saw another wedding dress that looked as beautiful as hers did, even when her daughter got married to a prince that turned out to be a big disaster. And she had a beautiful lace veil. There was a small notice in the St. Louis paper, like 3 lines about their marriage, that's all. And there was also a lot of confusion about who was in their wedding party. Julia set out a list of who was in it. Well, one of the guys that she listed had been killed in the Mexican War, so obviously he was not one of the groomsmen.
It's from her memoirs.
This is from her memoirs. And Longstreet, who became a Confederate officer and fought against Ulysses, was a friend of his. And there's always a mention that he was one of the groomsmen, but
Longstreet said he went to the wedding. He never said he was a groomsman, and you'd think that Julia, in her memoirs, if this famous Confederate general had been one of the groomsmen, would have said it was him instead of the poor guy who died in the war.
Did Julia not have much to do with her memoirs? Maybe somebody.
No. Her son transcribed them, but she did her whole memoir.
She stuck in it.
Yeah. When they left on their honeymoon, their wedding trip, they went to Ohio to visit. This would be her first time to meet Ulysses' family, who would not attend the wedding because Colonel Dent was a slave owner, and they were ardent abolitionists. It was also her first time on a boat, and it was also her first time to leave Missouri.
Well, after they were married, he went, he was still in the Army, so he was stationed at various places in the East, in Detroit, and New York. And finally, in 1852, he was assigned to the West Coast. And Julia was pregnant. They already had one child. She came back to Whitehaven to live while he was gone. And the 2 years he spent in California were the 2 worst years of his life. He was 2,000 miles away from his family. He had a son that he hadn't even seen. It was an isolated post, Fort Humboldt, which is near Eureka, California, which is, Well, it's Northern California, and it was just Army guys in the post. Maybe he took to drinking, there's a lot of things about that. A lot of Army officers took to drinking when they were out of those lonely posts. He was very depressed. Promotion was slow, but on April 11th, 1854, he received a letter promoting him to captain, which was good news. On the same day, he wrote a letter resigning his commission. And he decided he would head home and go back to Missouri. And he told the officers there when he left California, he said, whoever hears of me in 10 years will hear of a well-to-do Missouri farmer. So he came back to live with Julia, the children, the colonel, and Ellen at Whitehaven. And you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I just have,
Yeah, go ahead.
like he said, Julia's first son, who was born at Whitehaven, and he was named Frederick after the grandfather. And then the second son was born in Ohio with Grant's family, and he was named Ulysses after his dad. But Julia was the only one who ever called him Ulysses. Everybody else called him Buck because he was born in the Buckeye State.
Oh, I would think so.
Yeah. So when they returned to St. Louis, they lived at Julia's brother's home also for a while, Wish, and she couldn't figure out why they couldn't just stay at Wish, because it was a lovely cottage, an English cottage, she described it as. And she really liked it. But anytime Lewis might come back and reclaim his,
St. Louis.
that was, it's at Grant's Farm. It's right on the corner at Indian Park.
Parking
Or that fake little rock mountain.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's rocks, big
There's
big
also-
rocks up there, and that's
Yeah.
basically the site of Wishton.
Across from Sappington
It
School.
burned down in 1870s, I think, or something like that.
And she really liked living there. But Ulysses was building her a home. And it was on land that Mr. Dent had given to Julia as a wedding gift, although he never really gave them officially anything.
The title to that property was a little vague. It was more like, you can use it. I'm not gonna actually give the title to it,
Yeah,
whatever.
it was the same when he passed enslaved people along to his children.
Yeah.
I mean, they could keep them until he wanted them or, whatever. They called this little house that he built out of logs. She wanted a frame home, but probably they didn't have one because they couldn't afford it. He called it hardscrabble. And this could have been a jab at all the people around them that were building farms and homes and naming them, quite,
Haven or Wishton Wish. I live in
something very
March.
elegant. And so he kind of did it and laughed a little bit. Or maybe it was just the right name for their house. If you've seen the pictures of it, you know what we mean. Ellen did die within 3 months of them moving to Hardscrabble. And at that time, Julia and Ulysses moved back into Whitehaven so that Colonel Dent wouldn't be alone.
It's still too much information. Well, Ulysses loved farming when he got back to Missouri. He loved it. In fact, he said, every day, I like farming even better, and I think I'm going to make a lot of money at it. Well, he wasn't all that successful. The first couple of years, he worked really hard. I mean, not only did he, at this point, the colonel was in his late 60s, and so he wasn't really doing much on the farm. So Ulysses was basically running his farm, trying to clear the property where Hardscrabble was going to be built. He was cutting the trees down and making them into firewood, load them onto the wagon, take them down to St. Louis to sell it every day. Also supervising the enslaved people who were actually doing the farming work on Whitehaven Estate. And he worked really, really hard. He would run into people when he was in town from Jefferson Barracks. I mean, it was still an active Army post, and every so often he would see them. He saw a man named General William Harney. He'd served with in the Mexican War. And Harney saw this guy in this wagon wearing this kind of rough clothes and carrying an axe and having this woods. He looked over there and he said, Grant, what are you doing? Grant said, General hauling wood. And he also met Longstreet around 1857 or 58. He was downtown, and Longstreet and some of his buddies from the Post were playing some poker, and they needed somebody else to sit in on it. And so some guy walked out in the street and said, "Hey, there's Grant. Let's get him to come over here." So Grant really wasn't much of a card player. He wasn't much of a gambler, not as at cards anyway, maybe in military life. But he came in to play, and had a good time. And then the next day, Longstreet saw him again. And Grant said, "Here, there's $5 I owe you." And Longstreet said, you don't need to pay me back." No, I borrowed this from you 15 years ago. Says, I want to pay it back. I can't hold on to it knowing that I owe you this money. And he said, "Well, okay, I'll take it." The last time he saw Longstreet until Appomattox in 1865. Although they were quite good friends, and they did actually, he appointed Longstreet as a postmaster after the war. Longstreet became a Republican. A little bit about Hardscrabble. She told you, he built it himself with the help of some enslaved people. They had a big house raising. It was all fancy. It is kind of maybe more important to people in these days than Whitehaven was than it was to them. Partly because Grant built it with his own hands. He was, not many places like that, or if there are any at all, left in the United States. And he built. Yeah, and it has its own history. After it was acquired by other people, it was over in Webster Groves for a while. It was at the St. Louis World's Fair, and then it went to Bush bought it, and now it's at Grant's farm. And we had the opportunity to go inside and see it. It's really much roomier than you would think. Looking at it.
He talked always about how tiny and cramped it was, and I didn't feel that way at all.
Maybe if you went upstairs.
Yeah, you can go upstairs.
Yeah, it's not gonna go upstairs.
You couldn't really stand up there. But I mean, the downstairs wasn't that bad.
There was a really important are you going to talk about that?
What?
About the legal case. There was a really important legal case that had to do with Hardscrabble. At the time, Julia was handling Ulysses' business affairs during the Civil War. And she rented it to a man who didn't pay the rent. And they traded their homes.
It's very complicated.
Complicated, but anyways, the other side reneged on the whole thing. And so they sued. And they said, she's a woman. She can't be sued.
The contract was invalid because she couldn't contract because she was married.
But it went all the way to the Missouri Supreme Court, and she received the decision in her favor, and that changed things for women going forward.
Well, gonna wind things up. Grant wasn't that bad a farmer. I mean, he was mainly, I would say, unlucky. I mean, he did pretty well the first couple of years, and then in 1857, the Panic of 1857, weren't any farmers doing very well that year. And then in 1858, there was bad weather. The family got very sick during the summer. They ended up getting rid, or at least leasing Whitehaven. They moved into the city for a while. He tried to go into the real estate business, wasn't very successful at that. He applied for a job as a St. Louis County engineer, didn't get that. And ended up moving to Galena, Illinois, working for his father in a store as a clerk in 1860. And of course, the Civil War came along. And, after that, the rest is history. When they left, though, for Galena, I mean, Ulysses and Julia never came back to Missouri to live. They did visit a few times over the years. But they never came back to live. Did buy the farm after the war, and did reassemble the property, and did own it up until 1885. He had borrowed against it, and then in 1885, they had a financial disaster. They ended up having to give up the farm. But this was Julia's assessment of how successful Ulysses, as she says, was really very successful at farming. His crops yielded well. That is, much better than Papa's, but not as much as he anticipated from his calculations on paper. I was a splendid farmer. Well, anyway,
She actually felt like that was the low point of her life. Living in there and having to do all the work. I mean, you're like churning butter. There's story
Yeah.
churning butter.
well, we assembled this book from various letters, from various stories. Of course, many of these were after they became famous, and people, oh yeah, I've got a story about that guy. So sometimes it's hard to sift through and determine, was it really, how much truth is in it? Was there a kernel in it? Was it just completely fabricated? But we did the best we could, and I think you'll enjoy reading about Ulysses and Julia and
And their family.
their families at Whitehaven in Missouri.
One of the things that happened when they lived in Missouri was that he realized that it was family for him, and that was important all the rest of his life. I mean, many of the decisions he made, many of the things he did, were based on this family that he wanted to keep together and keep successfully. He wrote his memoirs when he was dying, and so Julia would have money afterwards. Now, Julia was the first lady to ever write a memoir. And she tried to get it published, but she was kind of thinking that she was as important as her husband was, and she wanted the same terms that her husband had gotten for writing the memoir, and nobody was willing to pay her that much money. And so they just kind of languished for a long time, and they were not published until 1976.
Oh, wow.
And they were published at SIU by a man who was a scholar, grant scholar. His library, his name was Edwards, isn't it?
So
Yeah. Anyways, his library is at the Grant.
he left his
Center.
library to the Grant Historic Site.
Yeah.
His
So
research library.
yeah. So I thought that, and when you read memoirs and when you study famous people, I have found. I mean, like one of the things about Julia, of course, was the fact that here her husband was leading the Union Army, one of whose purposes was to free the slaves, and she toted a slave with her. She went. I mean, it's just great. She did, yeah, until the slave ran away.
Till
The
1864.
enslaved, yeah, and the
And she
enslaved person escaped when they were on their way back to St. Louis one time. She escaped in Louisville or Cincinnati. But
To
that's,
Louisville.
yeah, and yeah, I mean, to me that is just like so crazy. So and she said she couldn't understand why they would want to have their freedom because they had food, they had clothing, her father was so good to them, and that the only reason they were upset was because they might be free. And so you learn these things about these people because overall I liked her. I mean, she
might have been a little bit wild.
oh yeah, she was. Well, and
No.
that's the way she was raised, and all of the people that were around her were raised, were in that situation. And our next book is on Carnegie, with our Carnegie libraries, but of course we had to read about Andrew Carnegie. I mean, same thing. I mean, here he is giving these millions and millions of dollars to build libraries, give organs to church, doing all these things, and yet he treated. It just blows my mind that he says, "I don't want to die a rich man. I want to give it back. The people, it belongs to the people." But he didn't give it to his workers. I mean,
That's really work.
yeah, the ones who earned it. But anyways, it's very interesting, I think, to study people and to see how different. I mean, there's such good things and there's such bad things, and you've got to kind of weigh them and put them together.
Yeah.
So,
All right.
if you all have any questions, Ellen.
What crops do they grow?
Corn, wheat, cucumbers,
Potatoes.
potatoes,
Just
yeah. And the farming part was basically, where the big parking lot is down across from the Grant's Farm entrance. That's where
That's
they
where
farm.
they
That's
farm.
in that flat, and that's where they
Wow.
where the horses pasture is, down in that area.
The barn part of what he built.
It's
The barn, he built a barn for horses while he still owned the property. It
'Cause he
used to be
bought it
located,
separation.
over on, there's a street over on, oh, well, it's, if you're facing the visitor center, it used to be located over on the right of that. And they moved it to where its present location, rehabilitated it, and they made it into a museum. It's now the museum.
What it like.
No, where the bike is.
The museum,
It's the museum for the
closer to,
historic center.
like, off of- it was closer to Grafton.
Yeah. And they moved
But
it
that
up
was the
like,
family-ish that they
yeah,
moved the stream.
where all those
Gravel
nice
Creek
houses
was on
are.
one side, they
Grandview Village.
plowed the other side.
You know, the long street, with the Paul Bear, the street,
Oh,
Sheridan, Sherman, Long Street.
wow.
And he wrote a list of who he wanted to be his Paul Bear.
There you are. They were very good friends.
Hmm.
Even
Now, was he in
after,
the cavalry? Was there a
Pardon me?
cavalry? Was he in the cavalry?
No, he was in the infantry.
In the.
He was in the infantry. He, at the time he graduated, if you graduated high enough, you got to pick your branch you wanted to be in, and the elite branch was the engineers. That's
Oh,
what Robert E.
okay.
Lee went into. And then you could go into artillery, or you could go into infantry. He wanted to be in the dragoons. There was no cavalry at that time
Oh,
in
okay.
1843. It wasn't actually organized until 1855 or so, the first cavalry regiment. But since he was only number 21 out of 39, he went into the infantry,
Yeah.
the PBI, or bloody infantry.
and he did talk a lot about coming back to Whitehaven and raising horses. And in 1873, was that the year that he came back and put them all in a horse show?
One of those years, yeah.
He came back and put all his horses in a horse show that they were having in St. Louis. And they won,
Oh, good.
but there was a huge uproar about that because they said the horses didn't win.
Well, he was okay, so he's president of the United States, but so it didn't have anything to do with it, you know?
Yeah. That was the year his daughter got married and a lot of other things. And it wasn't much after that he said, I don't think I'll ever come back to St. Louis.
Yeah, he actually announced it.
Yeah.
And of course, they went to live in New York City.
Right.
His family was there, or
Yeah,
at
his
least one of
children.
his sons were there. And, you know, well, he lived in New York to the end of his life.
Didn't ever get along with his dad. Did he took? Did
His
he-
His
dad?
brother, Jesse.
Yeah.
Yeah, they got along okay. I mean, it was a little bit of a rocky relationship. I mean, he asked him for money when they came back to Missouri, and Jesse kind of like, yeah, you know, and he said, well, maybe you didn't get the letter. I said, so I'm going to send you another one. I asked you again for some money, and we don't really know if he actually got money from Jesse, but whatever.
And well, there's a whole chapter about rent and slavery that Jim wrote that we don't,
Yeah.
you know, that we weren't going to discuss here, but you know, there is one in the book about that.
Yep.
And I mean, even though he didn't get along with his father-in-law that much, Mike and I were just chatting a little bit here. He came and lived in the White House with them. He actually died during those years in the White House. But if he came to a dinner with the family, Julia had to sit next to him because he would say some rather outrageous things.
Yeah, Ulysses is going to shake his head and go, oh, that's the colonel for you. You know?
Yeah.
Well, again about Julia and not writing the letters and her eye problem and her schooling and her procrastination. All that seems like, to me, maybe she wasn't quite a student because it was difficult for her.
Yeah.
So she went to other things to amuse herself. It wasn't school. So maybe she didn't learn as much as she should have.
Oh,
about
no,
it.
she didn't.
So when it came to writing a letter, she would have been embarrassed possibly. Maybe she got it together enough with help to write a decent one 3 times.
He didn't
And that's
care.
why
Anything he got from her.
He didn't care, but she might. You know,
Anything he got from her.
it might have been too hard for her if she was.
It was I think it was very hard.
So she just kept it to
And
him.
when she was young, they offered her the opportunity to fix her eye, and she didn't want to have an operation. But then when she became first lady, and she was in the new, and maybe there's a whole bunch of stories about this that vary. I'm just going to tell the one I like the best. When she decided that, well, people are looking at me all the time. My picture's always in the paper. I want to fix my eye. And so she was going to have the operation in the White House. And the doctor was there and they were getting ready to do it. And Grant comes in and he says, Julia, what are you doing? And she said, you know, I want to do this. And he says, I fell in love with you the way you are now and I couldn't love you anymore. And so you do not need to have that operation. But I think the true story is that she was too old to fix it by then.
Oh, that could be. And
Yeah.
The first one's a lot better story. This is spoiler.
Yeah, made it, yeah, romantic.
Did you guys go to Galena to the house up there?
I had a trip planned with my sisters and they got sick.
They've got a statue of her out there, and you're right, she's not a pretty woman.
But they didn't even try.
Well,
She was
not a
I know, but
And she didn't have a picture, there's no pictures of her until she already has 2 sons by the time the first
Yeah.
picture was ever taken of her.
Because she comes across as, you know, a little short.
She's
like
short.
5'1", dumpy, and then very, very, oh, this is this, you know.
Yeah, I know, she's not a beautiful woman.
No, but it's wonderful that he fell in love with her and seemingly forever.
Yeah,
Mm.
oh, no, he said,
He didn't
I
drop the
fell in
ball."
love with her
Yeah.
when I met her and there's never been anyone else for me. I mean, he says
Yeah.
things that are a little bit romantic, actually.
Yeah, you read some of his letters, particularly the early ones. I mean, he was smitten. Of course,
Yeah.
he was like 22 years old. She was 18. And, you know,
Yeah, well, that's neat.
that was, you know,
Nobody
they
was.
were romantic.
Yeah.
They were romantic.
And I just want to say thank you to everybody for coming and to Left Bank for having us. So thank you very much. And I will see all of you again, I'm sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Yeah,
We appreciate
yeah,
you.
yeah.
Excellent. You guys were wonderful. All right. Do me a favor,